Welcome to Trib Talk. I'm Jennifer Napier-Pearce with the Salt Lake Tribune. 4 top leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints delivered a strong message on Tuesday, calling on local, state, and federal officials to pass laws that, number 1, protect gays and lesbians from discrimination, while number 2, also ensuring one's right to worship. It's a rare move for the global faith, and joining me to talk about their legislative push and the Church's stance on LGBT issues, from the church office building, Elder D. Todd Christofferson is with me. Also, Elder Dallin H. Oaks, who's struggling with a cold. There are 2 members of the church's Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I'm very grateful for your time today.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And just to be clear for our viewers, today's conversation will be limited to religious freedom and gay rights issues. Certainly, there are many other pressing issues for Mormons worldwide. Hopefully, we'll have future opportunity to speak with LDS officials on those topics. But for now, you can join us with your questions about anti-discrimination legislation and religious freedom bills. You can send those to the hashtag Trib Talk on Twitter and Google+. Put them on the page right here, sltrib.com, or text us to that number on the screen, 801-609-8059. We've already had overwhelming response from our audience. We'll get to some of those questions a bit later in the program. Gentlemen, you're calling for a balanced approach between religious and gay rights. Can you describe what you think that balanced approach looks like? Elder Oaks?
Well, a balanced approach, excuse me, will take account of the fact that neither non-discrimination nor religious freedom is an absolute. Each one of them has exceptions, and so when people advocating non-discrimination come forward, they need to know that they don't get everything they want. And the same is true of religious freedom. We are trying to teach basic principles, and then the lawmakers will work through the details.
Much of the discussion to this point in different places, it seems like it's been people talking past each other and based on the sense that it's a zero-sum game. Either I win or they win, but we can't both win. And our hope is that we can talk more of a balance. And as Elder Oak says, not talking absolutes, but in fairness.
In your remarks, you call for protecting key religious rights. What do you mean by key religious rights?
Well, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees the free exercise of religion. Key religious rights are not limited to worshiping or believing. They include acting on the principles of one's religion.
Why did you feel
things like teaching and obviously, as he says, the practice, the day-to-day practice of the values and beliefs.
Why did you feel the need to connect these two issues together? Could you, as a church, have just issued a statement in support of non-discrimination legislation, period? Why did you decide to link these together?
It's our position that they should not be seen separately, because they overlap and to some extent conflict with one another. And so it is not helpful to say that we support non-discrimination legislation independent of religious freedom. And it's not helpful to the overall issue to say we support religious freedom independent of non-discrimination. We have to talk about both of them at the same time.
Please, Elder Christofferson.
Well, where it's been to this point anyway, talked about as one or the other, and they haven't been linked, it hasn't been a very successful approach. I mean, the past experience is that they tend to fail. Either legislation that's proposed strictly on religious freedom matters or on non-discrimination matters. Once in a while, something will be adopted, but for the most part, it's not a strategy for success either way. And when they are combined, I think we really serve the people, the vast majority of the people.
You dabbled in a couple of hypotheticals in your statement, so I'm going to throw a couple more out there. What about a Mormon owner of a bed and breakfast who does not want a gay couple to stay in that home? What about a Baptist restaurant owner who refuses to serve a lesbian couple? Where do you draw the lines? Because it seems that this can get pretty murky pretty quick.
It does get pretty murky pretty quick, and fortunately, we're not the lawmakers who have to draw those lines. We'll teach general principles and encourage the two extremes to talk to one another. But in applying these principles to the kind of circumstances you cite, it's got to be the give and take of the democratic process within the limits of the law, of course. And those are the kinds of questions we won't speak to because we're not the lawmakers. We teach the principles.
What's the motivation?
It will take a lot of discussion. I mean, we're under no illusions that this is easy. We're talking about something that's really hard work, but certainly worth it, and certainly better than not trying.
Well, what's the motivation behind this statement? Are you mostly concerned about religious rights for the church as an entity, ensuring exemptions for BYU housing, for example, or are you more concerned with protecting the individuals practicing the religion? Your response?
We're concerned with both. We're concerned with the free exercise of religion by our members, and we're also concerned with the church as an institution, the sponsor of different organizations such as BYU.
Anything to add, Elder Christofferson? No, that's it. They're both of very significant importance to us. It's not just institutions; it's people and where they live.
Speaking with Elder Dallin Oaks and Elder Todd Christofferson, they're discussing the LDS Church support for legislation that protects both religious freedom and LGBT rights. And you can send your comments to the hashtag Trib Talk or put them online here at sltrib.com. Again, we've received many more questions than time is going to allow. So I'm going to select a few as a representative sample. I hope that's okay with you, gentlemen. I want to start with some legal questions, and maybe this is another clarifying question. An anonymous text came in. Would the protection extend to the evangelical restaurateur who refuses to serve Mormon missionaries? Again, you talk about how these are the details are going to have to be hashed out in the democratic process, but often the devil is in the details.
Well, of course, we realize that, and we're talking about principles that it should apply to all citizens and to all persons of whatever religious persuasion or gender. And so you put a very valuable hypothetical. It's just as valuable as hypotheticals involving other groups. But we won't get into that detail.
Fair enough. Many questioners want some clarity from you on what public advocacy means, and I'm just going to give you a sample. Here's a EC writing in an email. As a believing active Mormon who also strongly believes in gay rights, it's unclear whether I can belong to an advocacy group, march in a parade, participate in a public action with groups like Affirmation or Mormons Building Bridges, or even post to my Facebook wall about these issues without facing discipline. A related question on Twitter from Jen: if I support my gay son by marching in a parade, will I lose my temple recommend or be excommunicated? And finally, another, Jason Bryant: I'm an active member in good standing. I want to understand whether publicly supporting gay marriage or groups like Ordained Women could cause me to lose my temple recommend. If I privately believe in these ideas, would I still be temple worthy? And if so, then why would the act of public expression make me unworthy if a privately held belief does not? What is the difference between a belief and its expression? There's sort of a lot packed in there, but obviously a lot of people care about this issue.
Surely.
A heavy question. We have members, individual members in the church with a variety of different opinions and beliefs and positions on these issues and other issues. You can reflect back on the Equal Rights Amendment years ago. This isn't the first of that kind of thing where we might have different feelings or different positions, but it doesn't, in our view, doesn't really become a problem unless someone is out attacking the church and its leaders. If that's a deliberate and a persistent effort, and trying to get others to follow them, trying to draw others away, trying to pull people, if you will, out of the church or away from its teachings and doctrines. That's very different for us than someone who feels one way or another on a political stance or a particular action, to support a group, affirmation or any others that you named. It's just these are things that maybe there's fine lines here and there, but by and large, they're two separate things.
One of the things that needs to be pointed out, and I apologize for my voice. I guess all of us have been in a position when we've lost our voice at an inconvenient time. But one of the things that needs to be pointed out is that the questions you ask are not resolved at church headquarters. They're resolved by prayerful consideration of a bishop who's been taught the principles of love and the limits that apply. And I find it quite significant that despite all the worry along the lines that you mentioned, I haven't heard of a discipline case. And I'm sure if there were one out there, it would be reported by you and your colleagues and those who are posing questions to us.
But it is an issue of judgment.
Oh, yes, it is.
And they're in a position, the local leadership, to really weigh what's going on. We can pose and we can parse words and all the rest, but they're in a position to understand what's really in a person's heart and where they're coming from.
Well, this sort of dovetails a lot of questions about that local leadership and the discretion that they have. Here's one from Tina Marie Off. I have a transgender son who came out to us about a year ago, but I just told my bishop 2 Sundays ago. I hate having to fear what retaliation I might have for supporting him. Some bishops are awesome and loving, and some people get the threats of being excommunicated. I think we as members need that assurance that we can indeed have our own opinions, support our children, and still follow our beliefs. A related Facebook post from Susie Hollingsworth Bradshaw. Why does one bishop allow full participation in church activities, including callings, to an openly gay member, but another bishop excommunicates a member who is also openly gay and wishes for full participation? There's too much discrepancy between congregations on this issue in the church. Thoughts on, obviously you support local leadership and them having some latitude, but is there a need for more direction from church headquarters?
I believe there is, but I would like to say first that we do not concede the representation in that question. We do concede that we have about 30,000 bishops in the world, and there are differences, and we are constantly trying to teach correct principles, and where someone gets outside what is permissible, there's an appeal process, and that's a real appeal process. We know of cases that have been reversed on appeal. So we do our best in a church with 30,000 wards and branches to maintain uniformity and also the individual discretion under the power of inspiration that we give to our bishops and branch presidents.
I think that's those are two things there I think that bear emphasis. One is the mantle that a bishop has, and his spiritual gifts that come with that are very real. And secondly, we do recognize the need for constant training and sharing, and we're committed to that. We're committed to that ongoing, and it's something we have done and will continue to do, just so that there's as you say, a greater uniformity, but a greater sensitivity, so that we all understand the general principles that underlie what judgments have to be made.
Also, this question concerns transgender, and I think we need to acknowledge that while we have been acquainted with lesbians and homosexuals for some time, being acquainted with the unique problems of a transgender situation is something we have not had so much experience with. And we have some unfinished business in teaching on that.
Yeah.
A few questions. Thank you again for indulging these questions, because I think there are a lot of sincere questions out there. A few questions. to participate in temple worship, remain celibate for life, or seek a heterosexual marriage. However, the professional psychological world would suggest that either of these solutions is a formula for mental and emotional problems such as depression and anxiety and even suicide. Alice Roberts on Twitter, will the updated mormonsandgays.org website include more practical direction for families with gay kids to stem the tide of suicides? And one last related one from Inside Gay Mormon on Twitter: will you encourage local wards to hold a fifth Sunday lesson on Mormons and gays? So I guess there's a thirst for some statement out there about how the church is treating its gay and lesbian members, and how it's teaching about self-worth for these particular members. What do you say, gentlemen?
We cut off a little bit in the course of that question, but I think we've got the gist of it. We are committed to expanding, I guess you could say, both the instruction and the orientation that we give to members and we give to leaders. And you mentioned one thing, or the questioner did, about families specifically. And we do see this as something that's not just an individual thing, it's a family matter, and it's important in our view that we do more in helping family relationships and helping the families as well as the individuals deal with issues, and how to help them stay close to the church and in the church and find some solace and help and opportunity there for spiritual development. All the other things that we would hope for anyone, of course. But it is much more than just focus on an individual. It does have to be the family and the ward family. And there are things, and more things can be done, and we're looking that way.
Well, what about to Blake's concern that there really only are two options, though? If you are a faithful Latter-day Saint and you're gay, you either, one, stay celibate for life, or you enter a heterosexual marriage, which psychologists have said can result in depression, anxiety, and suicide.
We definitely do not recommend marriage as a solution for same-gender feelings. In times past,
it's not a therapy.
No, it's not a therapy. In times past, decades ago, there were some practices to that effect. We have eradicated them in the church now. The dilemma that you pose is a doctrinal dilemma, not a policy dilemma. We're committed to the law of chastity. We're committed to the kind of marriage that God has revealed, that has been in effect for thousands of years. And while we recognize that puts some of our well-loved brothers and sisters in a very difficult position, that position is quite comparable to the position of someone who has not yet found a marriage partner, or may have some physical difficulties that, or emotional or economic difficulties that prevent them from marriage. It's not unique to be chaste for life.
Again, if you have questions, comments for Elder Christofferson or Elder Oaks, please send them to the hashtag Trib Talk on Twitter and Google+, or put them right here at sltrib.com. You went public with your non-discrimination endorsement and the religious freedom statement a couple of days ago. It immediately stirred up the public square. And frankly, you have been criticized for asking for legal protection for religious people to discriminate. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that particular criticism.
Can I say two things in that regard? Calling it an attempt to legitimize discrimination really is, to me, it's a misrepresentation that tries to avoid the dialogue that needs to take place. It's just an easy way of avoiding discussing these things and sorting them out. The other thing is, we did anticipate the kind of reaction that has come back. Much of it has been very positive. I'm really pleased that we've seen so many voices in so many places saying this merits consideration, and it is a way we can we can follow. There are voices, and we've heard them on each end, if you could say it that way, that say, so you're not going far enough, and the other side, you're going too far. But frankly, I think that makes our point, that we do need to focus on the middle ground, on the reasonable balance.
It does make the point. And when I heard that we were accused of trying to use religious freedom to eliminate non-discrimination laws, I thought to myself, well, that characterized as one side, but the other side is using non-discrimination laws to eliminate religious freedom. This is a situation where we don't have two absolutes colliding. We have a collision, but it's between two different, strongly held and valuable values in our society, each of which has to accommodate exceptions. Religious freedom must accommodate the exceptions of the health and safety of the population. If I belong to a religion that advocates worshiping fire, I still can't have fire in my high-rise, for example. That may seem a ridiculous example, but there's some analogous cases that have been litigated, and it's quite clear that religious freedom is not an absolute. Non-discrimination is not an absolute either. You can't come forward and say that everybody must be treated equally without regard to a lot of other considerations. Otherwise, a 12-year-old would have a right to join the Army, for example, or whatever other examples one might put forward. They are both absolutely valuable, essential values in our society, but they're both subject to exceptions, and we're trying to have a civilized way to meet middle ground and work them out. And we're preaching principles, and we encourage lawmakers to do a good job of it.
Is this sort of a show of force by the church? I mean, do you expect that lawmakers will pass legislation, particularly here in Utah? It's a non-discrimination bill, a statewide non-discrimination bill has been elusive for state lawmakers for a number of years. I mean, are you hoping that your statement puts them over the edge?
Well, we're hoping that we can have improvements. And while we have no coercive measures to use on lawmakers, for example, some people may wonder whether there's church discipline if somebody votes contrary to what church leaders want. There's no case on record of that. We don't have coercive means, but we have goodwill, and we have a bully pulpit from which to teach, and we have some ideas about principles, and that's why we're in the game.
In a way, we're really hopeful that Utah would go forward and provide a model that other states, maybe even the federal government, could use or learn from, that would be useful in other places. Again, you know, we obviously don't have the power to impose anything, and are not looking for it. Don't want that. But values are what determine any law that gets adopted, and it's sorted out in a democracy, at least, by persuasion. So we hope we're persuasive, but time will tell.
And we're also interested in discouraging coercive measures. We have many instances we're aware of where people have been subject to retaliation or discharged from their jobs or handicapped in their livelihood because they have spoken or contributed to an issue in the public square. We think that we should have freedom of speech and freedom for people to get out and do what they feel is right to persuade without being subject to retaliatory measures.
On any side.
On any side.
You're calling for civil, respectful public discourse, and yet in the past the church has had harsh tones, at least, to the discussion surrounding LGBT rights. In a Tribune story that we published on Tuesday, Elder Oaks, you were quoted as saying that the church doesn't seek apologies and we don't give them. And of course, this sparked a whole storm on social media about those who wonder how this view comports with Christian theology. Again, wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
I'm not aware that the word apology appears anywhere in the scriptures, Bible or Book of Mormon. The word apology contains a lot of connotations in it and a lot of significance. We do not seek apologies. When our temple was desecrated in California, when people were fired and intimidated, when a lot of other coercive measures were used, we sought no apology. That's what I meant by saying we don't seek apology. We think that the best way to solve these problems is not a formal statement of words that an apology consists of, but talking about principles and goodwill among contending viewpoints.
You note that neither side is going to get everything that they want. Where are you willing to compromise on the religious freedom side?
Well, I think that will come out in the give and take. There are, as we said, a few things that we feel are key. People in their homes and in their livelihoods, in their lives, have to be able to act according to their conscience. You know, we had, for example, recently in Canada, a provincial bar that voted to prohibit anyone graduating from a particular law school from practicing law because they had at that school an honor code that prohibited extramarital sex. You know, that kind of thing, you know, we can't tolerate and have freedom of religion and conscience in society. So there's an extreme case, but it's going to have to be sorted out. But the main things we've talked about are the freedom of the church to carry out its functions, and the freedom of individuals and families to practice their faith, not just talk about it in the walls of their home, but within the home, but just practice their faith.
I can give another example, which is more personal. I'm aware of correspondence because I was involved in it, where an LDS parent wrote and said, I found out that my son is gay, or he's come out of the closet or whatever, and I forbade him to come to our home, and I cut him off and said he's not my son anymore. And I wrote a rather stern reply to that. That's just not acceptable behavior on the part of a parent and in a loving relationship and even in the public square. And so I encouraged the parent to repent and reestablish a loving relationship with a child, even though they regretted very much the communication and the status and so on. But now that does not mean that a parent needs to accept everything that child would choose to do in a way that would imply parental endorsement of the behavior. When we get beyond status or dialogue and get into behavior, then parents have to know where to draw the line.
You're calling for non-discrimination laws in housing and employment. One other law that seems almost inevitable, the U.S. Supreme Court, of course, is going to be taking up the gay marriage question. Gay marriage already legal here in the state of Utah. Can Mormons who support gay marriage be considered members in good standing if it's the law of the land?
Yeah, we all live under the law wherever we live, and where that may become or is legal, it is. That's the law. But we do that, and all of us, I think, in our daily lives, live under laws or circumstances that don't comport with our values. And part of what we're talking about is learning to live together in a respectful way. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that others have to be coerced into adopting or following or consenting to what the law may permit. the law permits it, but we're not going to preach it or accept it or live our lives and conduct ourselves according to what that permits. The law permits drinking, and we don't drink, that sort of thing. So it may be legal, and that's fine, but our practice, our belief, our understanding of what is really, in our view, very basic to the purpose of life is not going to change.
Our time is up, and you've been very generous with your time. Finally, you were very clear that this is not a change in church doctrine. In a practical sense, what does all of this mean for members of the church?
Well, while we haven't changed our doctrine, we're asking people to be more loving and more understanding and less confrontive, and we're addressing how people practice that doctrine. The doctrine is unchanged.
Elder Oaks, Elder Christofferson, thank you so much for your time, for your candor. I hope we can do this again.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you.
And much more on faith and religion right here at sltrib.com. Thanks so much for tuning into Trib Talk today. We'll see you next time.